our number, 1-800-286-KJLH. That's your way into LA Speaks Out. And our special edition this morning into African American history. This month is deemed African American History Month, and as one of our guests said this morning, why? And we're going to find out just what he meant with that qualified why. Dr. Yosef Ben Yakima.
Pretty good enough.
Okay, all right. A little difficulty there. Is one of our guests, Dr. Well, let me give you his background. First of all, Dr. Ben is the way that he's normally addressed. He's practiced law as an assistant prosecutor in Puerto Rico. He's worked as a civil engineer, both Puerto Rico and the U.S. Was chief of the African desk of the United Nations Education Scientific Cultural Organization, dealing with archaeological information. He served as the civilian advisor to the permanent African missions to the United Nations. And Dr. Ben has taught at numerous universities in Africa, the Caribbean, and North America. Dr. Ben was a senior lecturer on the Faculty of Language, that was in Egypt during the 1989 academic year. And he's commuted between Harlem and Africa, throughout the continent of Africa. Dr. John Henry Clarke is Professor Emeritus of African World History in the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, that's in New York City. He's taught there for 20 years, retired from Hunter in '84, continued to teach as an adjunct professor until 1989, arriving in New York from Columbus, Georgia in 1933 at the end of the Harlem Renaissance. Dr. Clarke is the author and editor of more than 20 books, and we'll find out more about those publications as we go on. But again, into a look at our history, 1-800-286-KJLH, the way for you to pose any questions. And let me ask you now, when you made the question, why Black History Month, what were you alluding to?
I mean, if you don't have a history month for other ethnic groups, then something has gone wrong in presenting the history of the particular ethnic group that was brought here against their will from Africa. There's no Polish History Month, there's no Czech History Month, there's no English History Month. What we must understand is that African people were not brought to America to be given citizenship. They were not brought to be free, to give freedom, democracy. They were brought against their will to labor. And when you acknowledge a people's history, you're acknowledging their humanity. And when you acknowledge their humanity, you cannot separate them from other peoples whose humanity you have acknowledged. So therefore, if they are citizens, they have no civil rights problem. They have the same problem as the rest of the nation. And to acknowledge that they are the same as the others, good and bad, then that history must flow normally into the collective history of the multi-ethnic design of the nation itself. Now let me explain what I mean. I did not say take George Washington out of history. Leave him there, but show the relationship of African people to George Washington, the positive relationship. Show the relationship of George Washington to the two blacks who saved his life. And Phoebe Francis, who saved his life when he was about to be poisoned in her father's restaurant in New York, and another black male who saved Washington's life. And also deal with James Fotan, a tent maker of that day, and deal with that third and fourth winter of the revolution when Washington discovered that heavy wax matted cloth for the tents was more durable than the cloth for the breeches. And with the breeches made by that cloth, by James Fotan, that turned back that terrible winter of the American Revolution, and that helped save the American Revolution. And that Washington made his farewell speech to his officers in a restaurant in New York City owned by a black man from Jamaica whose daughter saved Washington's life when there was an attempt to poison him. I'm saying that the history of the people from from Africa should be integrated into the total history of the United States, especially our contribution to the economy. The end of the 19th century, the contribution of black inventors, especially Louis Latimer, who created the filament that went into the making of the durability of the electric light. Blacks who created lubrication systems, basic systems that help integrate the United States. Oh, now I'm not saying take a single white person out of the history unless he don't belong there. But I'm saying let our history flow normally into the history of the United States. When you talk about inventors, talk about ours, along with the rest. I didn't say take the others out, but put ours in. We talk about great educators, and talk about Booker T. Washington as a great educator. He don't talk about him as a conservative and Uncle Tom, because he was not. He was a strategist whose strategy didn't always work. When you talk about great American intellects who was equal to any intellect in America, white or black, you cannot avoid talking about W.E.B. Du Bois, though you do not agree with it, whether you agree or not. If you fail to talk about it, you're dishonest. I mean, let things flow normally. When you're talking about friends of presidents, then talk about the black woman who's not only the seamstress of Abraham Lincoln's wife, but who was a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln's wife, who was a little bit on the neurotic side.
Okay, all right. You gave us a lot of history in now 5 minutes into your introduction. We appreciate that. Basically, you're saying what's obvious has been admitted through an acknowledgement. That acknowledgement is now known as African American History Month. Dr. Ben, begin us, please, with the inception of mankind as we travel through our history.
I think that traveling through our history, we may need to make some severe adjustments that's going to cause us a lot of problems. And one of the problems that's going to cause us is the validity or invalidity of the Adam and Eve story. And that, to me, is, if anything is major in our life as African people here, it is getting a proper perspective and who we are, where life comes from, or at least the earliest possibility where life comes from in terms of human being. And we can't speak of Adam and Eve, who is just about less than 6,000 years old, when in fact there are fossil human find, like one called Denknesh, which most people may know as Lucy, found in Ethiopia, 3.2 million years old. That's the woman. And the man found in Tanzania, or once called Tanganyika, 1.7 million years old. I'm talking about Zenjanthropus boise. And there are other fossil finds. Now, to keep that information and deal as Adam and Eve, which is only just yesterday, which even doesn't come from us. That Adam and Eve is something that came from the Jews, and something here needs, again, qualification. When we say the Jews, we normally think of white people in this country. But white Jews are the minority of the Jews in the world. If you go to Israel, the Yemenites, dark brown Jews from Yemen, Asia, the Falashas, which is a misnomer, Beta Israel, black Jews from Ethiopia, you got other Jews from India, the Kashim Jews from India. They make up the majority population, so that when you hear blacks and Jews, the question is, what are those blacks? Is the assumption that the Jews are what? There's no Jewish color. So we got to make sure that we understand when we're talking about the beginning of man. When we're talking about, for instance, the concept of God, a single God, a Unitarian God, a one and only God, we don't go to Moses, though he's an African born in Egypt. We have to remember that we have to go to before Moses, Akhenaten. He taught about a one and only God before Moses was born, and Akhenaten died before Moses was born. About the moral laws that guide us, the same moral laws that the United States Constitution, the United States court and Supreme Court and the United States Congress is supposed to be dealing with or making, the same concept come from us. If from the book of the coming forth by day by night, I always called the book of the dead. Those 10 commandments come out of those otherwise called admonitions of Goddess Ma'at, or the 42 negative confessions. No, we don't have the concept of that. We're going to leave it to for the sake of time. When we go to Washington, D.C., the scale there, the blind white woman holding a scale with a sword in her hand, one scale up and the other one down, and call it justice. It's not justice, that's just this. Justice is when the two scales are balanced, which they copied from the Africans in Egypt, Goddess Ma'at. Even the most sacred symbol in Washington, D.C., the symbol of George Washington, is taken from an African symbol, an obelisk. The obelisk stolen from Egypt and Ethiopia, all over Europe. One in Central Park in the United States of America and New York. And the one in Washington, D.C. got nothing to do with George more than they copied it, the obelisk. I understood they got now put one in the Nevada, where the gambling is, Reno, a copy, build a building. See, all the time, the American dollar bill, the symbol in the left hand, upper left hand corner and the green side comes from Egypt. Washington and all of them adopted it as they adopted the Masonic symbol. So Professor Clarke was saying, how are you going to deal with the dollar bill without dealing with African history? And nobody mentioned anything about Africa with the dollar bill, the first of the legal tender. So anyway you talk about America, you got to talk about that. You got to talk about that in Washington cabinet. There was one black man in that cabinet, the first cabinet, where they talk about Weaver became the first black man in a president's cabinet. That's not true. Alexander Hamilton, grandmother, was a black woman, an African woman, and the grandfather was an Englishman. And there's no sketch about him. All those things, and that's why our youngsters are lost.
Dr. Clarke, feel free to jump in too at any point. That's for the both of you. Dr. Ben, the removal or the small presence and negative references of blacks in the Bible disturbed you. One pivotal point for your beginning to seek. That was one pivotal point for your beginning to seek this information. That led you to your travels throughout the world.
It was one of the things that led me to. I was born of a Hebrew or Jewish, if people want to say, father of Ethiopia, what are called a Falasha, and a Jewish mother in Puerto Rico, both of them black, what people say black Jews. And having to hear constantly people, I always wonder how we became Jews. And our history as Jews is mentioned in Torah. Moses married the daughter of the high priest of Ethiopia. There's no mention of Moses marrying any daughter from anybody in Europe, because there was no European history when the time Moses is mentioned, whether or not there was a Moses allegorically or in reality. It doesn't matter. But dealing with it, he's first mentioned of being born in Africa, a place called Goshen in Egypt. You see? Now, if that is true, the first time we had to hear about European Jews, they are not Jews, but in fact Khazars, a European people who were caught in the midst of a fight with European Christians against European Muslims. They not wanted to be in this fight, adopted Judaism as the way out. Now, that was one, but the other things that made me travel first, remember I came from Ethiopia, went to the Caribbean, went first to Brazil and then to the Caribbean. My mother's home after the overthrow in Ethiopia. My father couldn't get back. Now I grew up there from 6 to 23 between St. Croix and Puerto Rico. Was the teacher, the only time the teacher would ask me any question about my home. And they had a thing they called St. John the Baptist Day in Puerto Rico, where all the children who came to Puerto Rico from different places would be asked by the teacher something about their background. the little German children, and that they got the little Irish children with potato farm and thing, will speak about when the teacher came to me, she would purposely pass me and said, when I got hurt, and I said, you don't ask me, she said, well, we don't have no Tarzan and Jane picture now yet. One is due coming. Then we'll ask you about Africa.
See, you cannot, we must understand, you cannot oppress a people and admit that history all at the same time. Because if you admit that history, admit that humanity, you will know that they shouldn't be oppressed. Now can you afford to educate and oppress people? Because that's a contradiction in terms. Because if you educate them, they will learn how you handle power. And if they learn how you handle power, they'll take your power away from you. So you cannot, afford to give them a proper education. Because if you understood that education has but one honorable purpose, one alone, and everything else is a waste of time, and that is to train the student to be a responsible handler of power. And so we're going to have to start educating our children at home. We have to stop this Jesus freakism long enough to educate them in the church. We're going to stop the phony fraternalism, sororityism, and fraternalism, and realize the Greeks had no fraternities or sororities until they came in touch with African secret societies. We have to claim our original copy and stop practicing someone else's carbon copy of religion, organization, and society. Then if we did this, even without firing a shot, we could turn the whole world around. But we have to first look at ourselves in the original tradition.
When we look at and presume a deliberate orchestration of oppression or deliberate deletion of people, we would think historically it was territorial. But when we look at it and apply it to today, it's more along racial lines.
It's international, and while it is basically along racial lines, it goes beyond just that, because if it's along racial lines only, then while the British still oppressing the Irish.
Okay.
And while two white people in what used to be Czechoslovakia engaged in a waltz of genocide against each other, because one's a Muslim and one's a Christian.
Okay.
So the oppressor has a program, irrespective of your color. The oppressor has a program, and that is, he not only colonizes history, he colonizes information about history. And the most disastrous of all the colonizations of the oppressor is the colonization of the image of God.
So what is the universal program directed to blacks?
The universal program directed to blacks is to control them by any means necessary, and to control every wealth-producing resources in every country where black people are, and that program is succeeding.
All right, we're going to go to our phone line to talk to some of our listeners. 1-800-286-KJLH is our number, and I think it's Grace on the line.
Yes.
Good morning.
I was sitting here and I was listening to your conversation, and one thing that Black History Month does do is it gives people a lot of food for thought, because otherwise we wouldn't be having this show, and we would be able to sit here and listen to it, and it makes you want to go out and find out something else. Because if Black History Month wasn't the way it is, I wouldn't know a lot of things that I've found out during that month. We're a high topic of conversation everywhere that you live. They have art showings and different things like that. It wakes you up and makes you want to go and find out more about your history. So I just might say it's a good thing that we have it, because otherwise I wouldn't get it. We're talking to them.
My sister, and that's one of the things I'm saying. You deal with black history, and let me change the word. You deal with African history every day of your life. The point is, you don't know to identify it. You take the dollar bill in your hand, and you can't use it without dealing with black history. You, as Dr. Clarke just told you about, I think suggested, you deal with Granville T. Wood. Anytime you jump on a train and you do anything with General Motor machine, his pattern for the different McCoy with the coupling and so forth. But you deal with almost every black person. They got a Bible, or you got a Torah, or you got a Quran. And none of these are possible without Africa. The center of these books are Egypt and Ethiopia and Sudan. The Jews are begging the Ethiopians to come and save them in the battle with Assyria. The Jews are claiming that Moses was born and taught in Egypt, and he was trained at the Grand Lodge for the priests. The Jews are talking about amen. For instance, every time you say amen in your church or your synagogue or your mosque, you call in and the God amen, A-M-E-N, which your people tell you what. So what is the point is this, is that there's so much of you, even in the Bible, but the fact that you are denied that privilege. When you read the Bible, is there any place in there tell you that they're talking about Africa? You heard of Egypt being in the Middle East. But when you take a map of Africa or the world, Egypt is in Africa. And when they talk in Genesis about the worship of the golden calf, did you think it was just a cow up there? You were worshiping, and the voice sounded like a sister. Mm-hmm. They were worshiping a sister called Goddess Hathor, symbolized by a cow. Every Indian that in the Hindu religion worship an African sister and pay reverence to the cow, symbolic of Goddess Hathor. And that's what we're talking about, is not only being told this, is that, but to recognize things that you do every day, which is African.
If you wear a shoe, you're paying respect to Max Langer, who created the shoe machine. If you turn on a fluorescent light, you're paying a respect to Latimer, who created not only the first textbook on incandescent light, but who assisted Edison in the development of the longevity of the electric light. If you use a lubrication system, you're paying respect to McCoy. And if you see the coupling on the train that holds all that weight together, you're paying respect to another black inventor.
Granville T.
Yeah, if you use a paper bag, a saddle, a hat rack, that's a whole catalog of black inventors and contributions to society. And if you are part of this...
A clock.
Yeah, a clock. If you're part of this silly dialogue between black men and women, you're paying a disrespect and showing an ignorance of how we dealt with each other, man and woman, before foreigners interfere with our cultural way of life.
If you go to Washington, D.C., you can't drive a street without Banneker. He laid out the city.
After the freshman, LaFleur
fell out
and took his plan.
Yes,
black man who remembered his plan redesigned it and designed the city of Washington. The city of Washington, one of the few cities in America, has streets broad enough to take traffic.
That's Stuno, is it?
Yes, good morning. Listen, Jackie, I really want to thank you so much for bringing our esteemed elders onto this show so that they can educate us.
Well, let's thank them.
Yes, thank you. Brothers, I will be there this afternoon to hear you speak. My question is this. There's been a lot of controversy lately over this whole issue of the involvement of Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch Jews in the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, everyone's willing to acknowledge the role of Christians, of Arabs, and even of other Africans in the slave trade, but there seems to be this widespread denial of any Jewish participation. And secondly, I'm interested in your comments on these Negro so-called intellectuals like Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West who have come out and accused you all of being demagogues and pseudo-scholars.
I like the headless.
Louis Gates and his cadre of black conservatives are professional white behind kissers, and they are unworthy of us as a people. They've sold their souls for 30 pieces of silver, only to discover that silver is no longer the medium of exchange on the current market. Let's pity them and move on to something better.
There's no antidote necessary because the coffin is already closed, but let's put some dirt on the coffin. When you are dissatisfied with yourself, like Michael Jackson being extreme, you will do anything to be somebody else. Do you notice that most of the people that condemn us can't find spouse that look like their mama or daddy? Is it accidental that these people are ashamed of themselves and try so hard to be that they go and marry other people who don't want them, and they condemn us for loving black folks? I like to be condemned like that all the time because I like to have the greatest.
I hate to take a break, but we have to take a break. We'll be back. 1-800-286-KJLH, where LA speaks out.
I hope we don't take you off there.
Oh, you guys are...
That was that quality initiates or radio auction. That was a stinger.
Yes, it was.
A stinger. He's brought in the introduction before you one night is the good life.
A Steno, is that...
A stinger.
A Steno, okay.
Yeah, A-S-T-E-N-U.
Yeah, my daughter didn't spell it right.
Yeah, sharp.
They're really trying to make this Henry Louis Gates thing an issue.
Oh yeah, man. Because he's the new bed arrested. He's with the intellectual, and then West, West left Princeton. It's on, yeah.
He left Princeton?
Yes, he's now with Gates.
Oh.
They want to get one woman on the team, Mel Clinton, who's a professional married white man. She's on a third white man right now.
My Angela got her beaten by 4. My Angela got her beaten by 4. And she's gonna marry. Maria Angela is marrying a white North Carolina to prove that the state she comes from now love black people like they love white people. She said this is the reality to North Carolina. I guess this is the captive. But she's in her 4th white husband. Her first white husband was a South African. The poet laureate.
May I have your ages, please?
Mine is older than them talkers.
Okay. Dr. Clarke?
I will never be 70 again.
We'll never be 70 again.
I was 74 the last day of 1993. I'm working hard. I'm 79.
I was born 1915, so that makes me 79.
From your account Fed
Marvelous, marvelous.
The discount gets you a rate of 3.95%.
See, I'm blind, so I listen to your voices to see if you kind of decide whether you're still chaseable now. So don't get you out of age.
I've got a nice looking young daughter. That's for me.
We have all of our lines are lit. People waiting to talk to you. We have, see, we had started, what, 10 after 9? 10 after 10? 15 after? Okay. So we'll have one more commercial break in 10 minutes, and then we'll go a straight 15 minutes with you. I mean, this is a 4-hour show. It really is. And that's not enough.
I'm trying to see my daughter while I'm here.
Oh.
You're going to see her, John. We're going to make sure that if
She's a film editor.
if we got to carry her to wherever she is before you go back.
Now she's getting ready to go to Europe, spend all the money, so she hit her father for another $1,000.
Uh-oh.
That's what fathers are for. Pay bills.
I gotta give away the tickets.
Especially the daughters. During the club, suppose you had 8 daughters.
Anybody can answer, and that's all right. Girls independent. We're
I could
independent.
send 3 boys to school for what it costs me.
I thought about this. Dr. Clarke mentioned the historic events of 1492. And if any people can answer those, you think that might be too deep?
I bet you
last hour.
Your grandchild. I did not think so. Your
Back on
grandchild.
right now.
I didn't know you
We
could know
have
that
some
child.
tickets to be given away, a chance for you to
Yes,
sit back,
the picture. She showed me the
listen,
picture.
analyze, and learn from our two guests this morning, Dr. Clarke and Dr. Ben. They're going to, let's see, how do I put this? They'll be at Bridges Auditorium, Claremont Colleges, from 4 p.m. through 10 p.m. What's happening? They're going to be honored in the first annual MIZI, that's word for senior elder. It's an honoring service. African dancers will be there along with drummers, poets, storytelling, music, and speakers. And again, you will be privy to even more profound comments from our two elder statesmen. Tickets, we have 2 pairs, so that's 4 tickets for hopefully 4 people, but 2 groups of people. And we're trying to figure out how do we give these away. Well, I came up with something, and I don't know if it was going to be too intense or what, but something that I learned from Dr. Clarke. He says there were 3 historic events in the year of 1492 that he has taught his students. I think one that most people in North America are aware of, and that's the alleged discovery of North America by someone. Okay. But there were 3 that he mentioned, and if you can get through on the lines and tell us those other 2, we will gift you with these tickets. But right now, let's go back to our conversation with Dr. Clarke and Dr. Ben. Christianity started in Egypt versus Rome.
That is true. It started in a place called Alexandria, named for the Greek conqueror of Egypt in 332, before the Christian era, with 2 people, one called Pantheus and the other called Boetius. They were the ones that started the concept, but they took it from the teachings of Osiris. I'm using the Greek words, but the correct name would be Asar or Asaru. Isis, the correct name would be Aset or Ast. And their son, Horus, correct name would be Heru. In a temple in Egypt called the Temple of Setai-1 at a place called Abydos, which was the first known holy land ever in the world. In that temple is a chapel. You will see on the walls, dug into the stone, the story of the Immaculate Conception, virgin birth, and resurrection. 4,000 years before there was a Mary, Joseph, Jesus, and Jehovah, the story of this event took place. It left Egypt and went to Greece as the Herculaneum worship of Isis. From there it